So we are going to paint these objects in. I've got these simple, basic three-dimensional objects. We're going to paint them in so that they have some shading to them, okay? So it looks like light is coming in, illuminating the objects, and giving them some dimension and some form, okay? So to start out, you can use any color you want to. Just remember, if you use the yellows or any of these lighter colors like the tan or the peach color in there, then to darken them up, your shadows, you're going to add some brown to them, okay? And I'll do one with yellow so you can see how that is, but you can use any color you want to. So there's a couple different ways to do this. We're going to use graded washes and flat washes to paint this in, okay? So we're going to need a little bit more practice with that. So I'm going to show you a technique that gives you a lot of control and can make it a little easier when you're starting, okay? So I'm going to start off with green, and I'm going to paint in one of these spheres here with this green, okay? When you paint with watercolors, you always start with working light and then darkening as you go. Okay, I also recommend that you have a piece of scratch paper handy. This doesn't have to be watercolor paper, but if you have just some scratch paper, just to test it out so you can see how dark your color is. And so I'm going to start out really, really light. About that light right there, okay? So to paint this in, I'm going to first paint in and fill in this whole little shape here. But I also want to make sure that I have a piece of paper towel handy or a tissue. Okay, so I'm going to paint in this whole area here. And I want to make sure that it's all nice and wet without any puddles. And I can see I've got little puddles here. So I'm going to kind of dry my brush a little bit so I can soak up just a little bit of this water. Because I want it all to be wet, but I don't want any puddles of water on there. Because that's where the paint's going to start to get out of control. Okay? So you may have to dab up some of this here. Just so it looks about like that. Can you guys see that okay? Okay? Now, while this is still wet, I've created a middle value here. I'm going to pick up some of my shadow color. And the shadow's going in this direction here, so I'm going to just kind of tap in some of this darker color here and let it blend all on its own. Okay, I'm going to start out kind of light. And then tap in some more paint, and then let the paint do its own blending. And while it's still wet, I'm going to create my highlight by taking a little corner of my paper towel and dabbing it to pull out some color. Okay? It's got to still be wet in order for this to work. So I'm just going to pull out and dry off this little spot over here. So you can see how quickly I made the shading on this object here, okay? So I've got a highlight already, a halftone, a core shadow, and a reflected light on that edge over there, okay? But this is I made this look a lot easier than what it actually is. So if you mess up and you want to try again, then you can have more copies. I've made extra copies because this can be a tricky thing to do, okay? So anyway, that's what you're going to do, and then you let it dry before you work on anything else. Okay? You can come over to another spot. I'm going to keep going just for the sake of the video, so if you need to stop the video, if you're watching the video from home or wherever, you can do that. So let's see, I'm going to pick up some of this light tan color and do the cylinder here the same way. Mix a really light version of that color. Paint in this whole area here. You got to do it all at once so you don't get a part that dries. So make sure it's even. Then I'm taking my paper towel and dab the side over here just to pull out a little highlight. And then, since I'm using this tan color here, I'm going to have to use a brown to create the shadow. And then making sure that first there's no puddles. I have a little puddle right here. I want to soak that up. I'm going to dry my brush off, soak it up. And then take some of this darker brown here and tap in right along where the core shadow is going to be, which is right along this edge where the shadow comes off the side of the object here. Okay, and let it do its own blending. Now you'll see that you might get parts that go out of control, so you have to keep an eye on it and make sure that the color doesn't start going places you don't want it to go. So you might have to keep an eye on it and slowly build up that darker color there. But what's really nice is you let the water do all the work for you. You put the color in, and if it's still wet, then it will blend for you, and you don't have to do much blending. What's that? No, they're fine. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to do that for each one of these shapes here. Let's do red next. Just be careful you don't start out too dark. If your color is too dark, it's hard to go lighter with it, okay? So you don't want to go much darker than this, because you can always make it darker, but you can't always make it lighter. I'm going to paint it in, pull out a little highlight along that edge there. Soak up any puddles that I have so it's even. Make sure it's even. Then I'll put in my core shadow. If you're painting the box, it's going to be a little different because you have 3 separate sides. We don't want to do them all together so that they all blend together. So you have to do each side separately. Okay? But we did that on the last project here. You start off again with your lightest value here. So I'll paint the top of the box in. Make it even, pull out a little highlight maybe on this corner back over here, and then let it dry. Okay, once it dries, then you go back in, you can paint the other side. I'm going to do this side over here. That's just going to be a bit darker than the top because it's still getting light, but not as much light as what the top did. Okay, then I let that dry. Then I paint the shadow side. That's going to be even darker than the other side. Yeah, thanks. Now on this side here, I'm going to put in a little extra paint along the top here to give this core shadow a little bit darker, just on top. So we get a little graded wash. Goes from dark to light here. It's kind of hard to see on the camera. Okay, so that's the best way I would work, is just kind of jump around, wait for one spot to dry before you work on another spot. Here we go. When it's all done, it should look like this. Or like this. Okay? Yeah, that's kind of what we're shooting for. So we'll work on this today. I won't do the whole thing, so you can kind of get the idea of what to do. And I'll just leave this example here for you guys to look at.